In this video, we'll be taking a look at a proof of concept real-time dashboard we built using data generated from the Accela Civic platform. In developing this solution, we used some really cool technologies, specifically called out here, Connect and RunScope, but more on those a little bit later. Our goal for this proof of concept was to develop a dashboard solution that behind the scenes was powered by real-time data analytics. It was important for the solution to be minimally invasive within Accela, as well as very easy to build and deploy. Additionally, it was real important that the solution was portable and was easy to use regardless of whether our customers were hosted by Accela in the Accela cloud or have Accela installed on-premise within their own data centers. We chose a really cool new technology called Connect to power our proof of concept. Connect enables scalable real-time data analytics. It was an interesting choice because it allowed us to push data to it in whatever format made sense based on the outcomes that we were looking for. Once it's out there in Connect, it's super easy to query and then turn around and ultimately visualize it. But let me come back to how we push data out there. What's really nice about this approach is that, again, we can shape how the data looks to however we need it to be to support the types of analytics that we're trying to achieve. And then again, additionally, since we are then querying the data out of Connect and not directly from Accela, we don't have to worry about any performance impacts. So let's start taking a look at how we built this and how all of this works. What we did is we took advantage of a really great feature within Accela, which is a powerful event-driven scripting engine. Anytime anything happens within Accela, some system events are triggered for everything, for submitting a new application, for updating workflow, for taking payments, for resulting inspections, for adding context to a record, you name it, a system event is triggered. And so in leveraging that, what we did is we wrote a very simple and centralized utility that no matter what any of those events that are triggered, you would then push details about that event from Accela out to Connect, similar to the format that you see up here in this black box on the screen. For this proof of concept, we kept the events rather general, regardless of whatever occurred, just to prove out our dashboard case. But that said, you really have a really cool opportunity with Connect to model your events to make them work exactly how you want them to for data analytics purposes. You have an opportunity to make them very smart. Perhaps you don't push all the activity to Connect as we are doing in this proof of concept, but instead identify specific milestones that should be pushed. Within those milestones, you can include really valuable information. For example, think about it this way. Perhaps you want to have a milestone for when a permit application is approved or a permit issued event. Within that event, before you actually push that event to Connect, you could perhaps calculate the number of days between the application and the approval, or maybe the number of cycles a plan review went through before the permit was approved during that time. So that's really valuable information to have in that kind of calculated format, because then once you get it out to Connect, you can then aggregate it all together with all the other records out there and do some really interesting analytics on how the performance of your agency is doing. And then once we have all those events flowing into Connect real time, we can turn around and start querying them and then ultimately build out our project here of a dashboard that's powered by real-time data. So let's take a look at this proof of concept. At a high level, here's kind of what we did. We used an Accela sandbox environment that allowed us to push events to Connect via their simple API. We utilized a tool called RunScope. RunScope's typically thought of as an API monitor tool, but we used it in this case to develop some API tests that allow us to simulate user activity via the Accela Construct API. Some of the types of things that we simulated are submitting different types of applications, users updating workflow tasks on those new applications, and then ultimately scheduling and resulting inspections. Once we had all that data flowing in through the Construct API, That was triggering those events to ultimately be pushed to connect. And then we were able to then turn around and use the Connect JavaScript library to both query events and aggregate them as needed, and then visualize them very easily on the browser. Let's take a look at the proof of concept in action. I've got my screen split into two here. On the left-hand side, I have RunScope up in my browser. And on the right-hand side, I have my Connect project portal over here. Let's take a look at RunScope first. I've got an API test open in RunScope. I mentioned that RunScope is used. It's a great tool to monitor your APIs. And in this case, I'm using an API test to actually simulate activity within the Accela system. So let's take a look at my test. In my test, I'm able to authenticate. I'm able to grab a list of record types of permits that I could apply for. I've got a script in here that's randomly grabbing a permit type that I'll apply for. I'll turn around and actually create that permit application. Then from that permit application, I will take a look and update some workflow tasks. And then ultimately after that, I will schedule some inspections and result some inspections on that newly created permit application. All of this will turn around and push events into Connect with some details about that event that just occurred. Now RunScope is super useful and powerful as it allows me to schedule that test to run on some frequency. So what you'll see here is I have my schedule up here, which will simulate a new application opening every 15 minutes or every 5 minutes, another one every 15, 30 minutes, every hour, etc. So what this allows me to do is having varying frequency of events being pushed into Connect, which would simulate maybe user activity a little bit better. On the right-hand side, we've got the Connect project portal, which allows me to take a look at my collections. For our purposes in the proof of concept, these collections are those different system events that I mentioned earlier. For our proof of concept, we're mostly going to be looking at application submit after, which will be triggered when a new permit application is filed. Anytime the workflow is updated, then this workflow task update after will trigger, and then this inspection result submit after will also trigger once I've resulted some inspections. So let's take a look at this in action. So I'm going to click Run Now, and what will happen is my test will start running, and in a moment I will see this total events pushed increase to by 1. So on the left-hand side, I'm getting my record types right now. Got one, just created the record. So in a moment, I should see 366, oh, there it goes, 3664. Same thing if I hop down to the workflow. Should see the workflow be updated here in a moment. And then ultimately, same thing with the inspections. I should see the inspections be resulted here in a moment. And there it is. So now that we've seen those events can put in real time, that's incredibly powerful. If I come back over here to RunScope, I've got some API tests lined up that demonstrate just some simple queries using the Connect API. So here I'm actually making a query to the Connect API. I'm not actually doing a query. I'm just doing an export of events that have been loaded in there. And so I've just got a couple of my collections identified here. So if I go ahead and run this test, it'll run here, and it should run really quickly. The more I understand about how Connect was put together, they're really focused on performance. So if we take a look, we're talking about tons and tons of events being fed in here. What we're seeing here is that I got all of the events from this particular collection, and the response was in 75 milliseconds. So if I take a look at the response, what I do see is an array of all of the events that I pushed in for this particular event type. So this is actually something called application-specific update after. This is the updating of custom data on records within Accela. So all the data that I pushed out there, again, I kept this pretty general for the proof of concept, but all the data that I pushed out there has been pushed out there and is now queryable from Accela. So what does that all mean? That means that I can now turn around and develop something like a dashboard that looks like this. So if I go ahead and refresh my dashboard here, we'll notice that all my numbers went up. You'll also notice how quick this went. Now this dashboard is very simplistic. It's, for the most part, doing some counts: how many applications were submitted, how many workflow tasks were updated, inspections completed, how many fees have been collected, what's the general value of the permit, the work that's to be done based on the permit applications, how many applications were opened by type, how many applications opened by day, down here, kind of just demonstrating some of the intervals that are possible with Connect, how many applications were opened by hour. So it starts at 11 a.m., 12 a.m., 12 p.m., 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, etc. There's all sorts of visualizations that are available out of the box from Connect. Here's a couple of gauge visualizations, and it was just all really super easy to put together using the Connect JavaScript library. So let's flip over and look at the source code. So I could do all this stuff client side because it's all JavaScript, jQuery, etc. Here I'm looking at just some HTML. This is the top row from my data from my dashboard. So we're looking at so far this week, and then these numbers that are being generated right here. All I'm doing, similar to many charting libraries that I might use out there, is identifying a div that I'll ultimately populate with the Connect JavaScript library. So number of apps this week, number of workflows, number of inspections, number of total fees, total construction value, etc. Now if I flip over to my JavaScript file that's powering behind this, it's pretty simple. I just have to fire up a new Connect object here, set some just kind of global variables that I want to use holistically on my dashboard, and then I can come down here. Querying super easy. You can notice that I want to do a select from this particular object. I want to do a count. I want to filter out any test record types. I want to provide a particular time frame and specify a particular time zone. It's super, super easy. For those of you that have ever used like D3 to do any data aggregation or anything like that, it feels very much like that. Once I have this query identified, I can just basically then drop it into the Connect object and specify some chart options. And next thing I know, I've got these values up here showing up in real time. So if I refresh this again, I'll see some of these numbers have gone up since the last time that we looked at it. And that's just because I've got my run scope tests still running. Let me flip over and look at my generate events test, and we'll notice that very frequently we're simulating this data coming into Connect, and that's our proof of concept. Thank you.